Riley, we both picked Syracuse to beat SMU. We were 21 points off. That's all it was.
Dude, I can't believe I fell for it because they gave good effort against Florida State, a Florida State team that I thought was going to be motivated to at least get Coach Ham one single victory in the ACC tournament. When it turns out Florida State was just one day ahead of quitting on their season, and Syracuse was.
Yeah.
This Syracuse team stinks, man. I knew it. I thought that every time I watched them play all year, they got blown out by a bunch of teams. They almost lost to a ton of bad teams. They're not fun to watch. I caught it at least three air balls in the second half. They don't value possessions. I'm disappointed in myself for even entertaining the fact that they would win another game in the postseason.
73 to 53 win for SMU. And aside from Syracuse stuff, SMU has been awful in quad one games. They've handled everything else pretty well. So we should have known that this was probably coming from SMU. You had a number of players at double figures, four players in double figures for the Mustangs. They forced 15 turnovers for Syracuse. They won the rebounding battle pretty convincingly. Syracuse just had an awful day shooting the ball. Like I couldn't tell you if this was more about SMU or more about Syracuse, but I can tell you that SMU was definitively in charge pretty much the entire way.
Yeah, I mean, I Syracuse kind of teased you a little bit with a 3-point deficit at halftime, but SMU opened up the second half on a 10-0 run, and it was pretty much curtains after that.
The
Uh,
halftime score was one of those things where it felt like SMU was in control. Like if you're Syracuse, you go and be like, "Oh, we didn't play that well. They're in control. We're down three." Like, that's a good thing,
mhm.
right? And then, as you mentioned, that ended very quickly.
I spent like 5 minutes yesterday gassing up Jair Davis and how well he was playing down the stretch of the season. Very first possession of the second half, he went up against Matt Cross in the paint, and I was basically like, "Oh yeah, I think Davis can counter some of the size that SMU will throw at him." Matt Cross like just ripped the ball out of his hands, and later on, like I think it was two possessions later, Cross got tied up with him for a held ball, and it was possession arrow to the ponies, and it's just like all that. I was like, "Oh yeah, SMU." Even though I'm still not really in on this Mustangs team, like you mentioned, this is what they do to bad teams. This is their strength. This is where their bread is buttered with the size of their front court. And even though Syracuse like has a couple tall dudes on the roster, doesn't necessarily translate to them being the tougher, more physical team. And I feel like I let Adrian pull the wool over my eyes after one good effort against a coach on his way out the door. Like with 1 3/4 feet out the door, I should say.
Yeah. Next year with Kyan Anthony's making or breaking his tenure at
It should
Syracuse.
already be broken, man. Like Kyan
That's
Anthony,
what. That's the only reason he's still there, right?
like look, this is what you do if you're Syracuse. You you sack Adrian Autry, call up Carmelo, and say, "Hey, we want to give you an advisory role in our committee as we search for our next coach." You get the best of both worlds. We know that Red is your guy. We know you love Red, but dog, just watch the product yesterday. Do you really want Kyan playing for this? Help us, Carmelo. You make him feel important. You keep the lineage commitment, and you go get a good basketball coach.
I think what Syracuse is hoping for would be, you know, Kyan's already committed. You give Red another year to work with that kind of talent, and hope that Jerry McNamara does significantly better than 14 and 18 at Siena, like he did this year. I think that's where Syracuse is at. Syracuse should want more than that, but I think
They
that's where
should.
Syracuse is
They're
at.
used to mediocrity though, because Boeheim stayed too long. Like, you want to know how many times Syracuse has won 20 more than 20 games since joining the ACC, Ralph?
Two.
I think that's right. Let me double check. I saw the stat the other day and it blew my mind. Yes, they have won more than 20. Okay, they won more than 20 games 3 times since joining the ACC. Yeah, 3 times. But still, 3 times in 11 years. That's not a good ratio. And one of those years was their fluke run to the Final Four in 2016.
Do
They
you
were
know what
28.
happens? You know what happens when programs like that, traditional power, start accepting mediocrity from old retired coaches and then into new ones?
What happens?
They go on game day and cheer the amount of losses they've had to top 10 teams.
Okay, come on now. Roy did not overstay his welcome.
Roy did not, but the end of Roy's tenure was bad.
It was. It was not good. Roy also knew when to call it quits when Boeheim hung on for arguably, like Boeheim should have rode off into the sunset after 2016 and that Final Four run.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Instead, he gave them a bunch of 16 to 18 win seasons and said, now you will hire my assistant.
It's an important offseason for Syracuse. SMU can be important offseason for them too, but they got more business at hand going up against Clemson in a rematch of the ACC football championship game in the ACC tournament. SMU is, these new additions and Cal and Sanford are the headliners because why are Cal and Sanford in the Atlantic Coast Conference? SMU's adapted nicely to this league.
They have. I I feel the same way about them that I did about Stanford, where every time I got a little excited that, oh, this team has like with Stanford, it was Reynaud. I'm like, oh, they have one of the best players in the league. Maybe he can get them over the hump. Maybe they will be the one who emerge as like a solid, the solid surefire like fourth team to make the dance. I felt that way about SMU after like the way they started their year. They had
Yeah.
a really promising 11-2 start, then got smoked, obliterated at home to Duke, and then went on the road to Chapel Hill and got annihilated by UNC. And since then, I'm like, okay, yeah, this team just there's some quad three and quad four merchants. Uh,
Yeah.
but who knows? Maybe they'll surprise me tomorrow. They do have some talent. They have some fun pieces. I mean, it's kind of a typical Andy Enfield roster where you load up on size in the front court. You have some shoot first guards who are a little erratic at times, but when they're on, they can be a ton of fun.
Talented team, good team. It wouldn't surprise me if they kept this going. We'll see what happens. We have a full preview of their game against Clemson up on the channel. So make sure you like and subscribe.